from NovaStar. I am the member of the North American. Today, we are very honored to invite our customer, George Ren, who is from the Involve Media Group. He has a very well experienced in the LED screen and also NovaStar control system. And he play our software very well. So this time we invite him to help us to give our customers some training on the operation of the software. Today, his topic is the building offline show and loading to online centers, which is very useful for your project or for your live shows. So hope you can uh, get some knowledge from these trainings. Okay, let's to invite George to start his trainings. So right now I will stop my sharing. George, you can start your training.
Hi there. Let me share my screen here. So we should have Smart up on the screen now. So and what I'm going to go through is creating an offline design and then pushing that offline design to online senders. So here's the front page of Smart. And you can see I have two MCTRL 4Ks hooked up to the unit. But I'm going to create an offline design. And the first thing here in the offline design, when you're creating a project, you have to give it a name. So this is going to be Wednesday Zoom. Pretty much everything else in here doesn't matter except for the source resolution. So I'm going to leave it at 4K at 3840 by 2160. We're going to change all these other things once we get into Smart. So I've created a project, Project Wednesday Zoom. It's going to save it in the Documents folder. Click OK. First thing I'm going to do is Control A, and I'm just going to delete all the cabinets. Then I'm going to go over here to the 4K. I'm going to delete it. And the reason I'm deleting this 4K is in order to do cascaded senders with redundancy, they all have to be on the same control system. They have to be on the same port. And you can't add a controller to an existing port. So now I have no cabinets, no controllers. So come down here to this plus. And I have an MCTRL 4K, but I want 2. So I'm going to double click in here so it's highlighted. Number 2, hit the Enter key and add. Now on port A1, I've added 2 MCTRL 4Ks. That's what I needed in order to make redundancy possible. So these are now cascaded senders on one control system. So there's my sender. And the next thing I need is I need cabinets. I'm going to go over to Batch Add. And I created a generic cabinet that happens to fit in 4K. So it's this 480 by 270 cabinet. And I'm going to make 8 columns and 8 rows. Click OK. And then up here, I'm just going to zoom so I can see the whole thing. So there are my 8 columns by 8 rows. That is 3840 by 2160. Here on sender number 1, I'm going to pick port 1, 4 cabinets, and I'm just going to go up and then click on a second port. And we're going to do this. So click on a new port. Every time I finish wiring a data port, I click the next data port to select it. While I'm doing this, let me open up So in Smart, you get this series of gauges that show you what your port loading is. So I am only at just over 75% capacity on all these ports. So I have no problem wiring all of this. So select the cabinets, port 5, go up, select the next cabinets. Seven. So Smart is very fast and very efficient. You can do this on a bus. You can do this on an airplane. You can do this in a way to wire things. And the reason I'm using this particular wiring with these cabinets is I want to be able to run in low latency mode. So the 4K and the 660 Pro both support low latency mode, but for on the sender side for low latency mode, you have to be less than 512, well, equal to or less than 512 pixels wide for low latency on the sender side. So I'm purposely wiring these so that each data port is only one cabinet wide, which in these cases is 480 pixels. So just a few more data ports here. 14, 15, and 16. So there I have all my 16 data ports hooked up. Now, before I do anything else, because this is an offline design, I've got all of my cabinets configured. I have the data ports selected. I've got everything connected. I like to go to Project and click Save. As something goes awry with my computer, I haven't lost it. Now, the next thing I want to do is set up redundancy. This is one area where Smart is far and away superior to LCT in setting up redundancy. So I'm going to go to Hot Backup. And here's our Hot Backup screen. Select Processor 1, drag it into the work area. Select Processor 2, drag it into the work area. Take Processor 2, drop it on top of Processor 1. I'm done. I have now set up full redundancy port to port from sender A1 number 1 to sender A1 number 2. Click Save. Save successfully, and we're all set. So that's setting up redundancy using Smart. That's port per port. I don't have to do anything else. Now if I open up, close this window, and I open up here, my second sender, you see these all show, these are, have the little redundancy icon. So they're backup ports. So there's no typing sender 1, port 1, sender 2, port 1 to backup is sender 2, port 2. It's literally drag and drop. It's a boon to doing very complex setups. If you have 6 or 8 senders, doing redundancy inside of Smart is by far the fastest method. So I've set up redundancy. I've set up all my port loading. I'm not exceeding anything. I'm going to go save the project. Not save as, just save. So I have saved all of this offline. Now, one of the cool things with Smart is it generates paperwork for you. So I'm going to take you through how to generate the paperwork. One click, export. Now, this exports a wiring diagram you can choose from in front or from the rear. So front view or rear view. I'll stick with front view for now. I'm going to save this to my D drive. I'm going to click this custom because I'm going to do a couple of things here. So let's do Wednesday Zoom, because that'll come up on every drawing. And then I'm going to add a logo. And if I go in here, and there's the logo. So I have our company logo here. So that's going to put the company logo on all the drawings. And they are going to show up as a PNG in a folder. I've given it a name of Wednesday Zoom, and I do export. It says, hey, in that folder, you already have a screen export. And if you do keep both, it just keeps all of the pre-existing copies and just adds a number to the folder that all of these drawings will be in. So this folder, it's going to be a screen export folder. It'll have 2 drawings in it. It'll have one showing the sender hardware configuration. I only have the 2 senders, but it'll show primary and backup there, and it will show a wiring diagram from in front. Keep both. Let me close this. And then if I go to screen export, so here's my screen export page. This is screen export 3 because I have several other copies. Open up this drawing. Here is our sender page. So port A1 number 1, port A1 number 2, they're 4Ks. It shows me that ports 1 through 16 are set up as primary, and on sender number 2, they're all set up as backups. And then here's our wiring diagram. There's our company logo that I added. And if I zoom in here, so down here, Wednesday Zoom is the project name, so that comes up as company name. The screen number, so this, if I change the name of the screen in the project, that'll change. Automatically configures it with the date. If you have custom cabinet information, it gives you the cabinet, things like cabinet voltage, amperage, total power consumption is all based on the RCFG data that you have in Smart. And then it has all of our wiring diagram for all of the ports. So that's, we've created an offline display. I've programmed it, I've saved it. Now how do I move that to an online presentation? So let me close this. So I'm going to just click refresh to make sure that I am still connected to these 2 senders. So I am connected to the 2 senders. And I will tell you that I have already done a factory reset on the senders. So they are completely reset. And right now they're showing, sender 1 is a single 128 by 128 cabinet because that's from the factory default, and sender number 2 is the same way. So I'm going to open up the Wednesday Zoom that we just did just by double clicking. Hey, look, there's Wednesday Zoom. And if I go send, and now it asks, do you want to match the device? And this is why I erased the devices when I created the original project and made them available for redundancy, because now I have 2 senders cascaded. I go yes. So offline device to an online device. So I'm going to make offline device number 1 is going to be online device number 1, and offline device number 2 is going to be online device number 2. Okay. And off it goes. So it's pushing all this data to the senders. Do I want to save this to the hardware? Yes, please. Saved to the hardware successfully. Now, how can I tell if this is actually saved or not? One of the things I can do is I can go look at the hot backup. And if you notice here, I've got the two senders. They're both online. And this says, hey, you've got something hooked up to port 1. Port number 2, there's nothing, but port number 2 on your backup has something. I don't have any cabinets hooked up today, but I do have some receiver card power modules hooked up. So I have a receiver card hooked up to port 1 on the primary sender, and I have a receiver card hooked up to port 2. To demonstrate that, if I move the backup, so I just disconnect it and I plug it into another port, and then I click refresh, you'll see that the backup moves to the port that I have it plugged into. And it's saying, hey, you got nothing plugged into number 4. However, port number 4 is running in backup mode. So that's a way to tell whether or not we're running in offline mode or not. Where our backup is working, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be. These are the primaries. If I take that number 4, and I put it in primary number 4, click refresh again. Now it says, hey, you've got data on port 1 and you've got communication to a receiver card on port 4. So that's how you can tell whether or not you're actually hooked up and running and everything is nice and green. And the last bit, I'm going to go into my vSend. So load capacity 3840 by 2160 at 60 hertz. I'm going to go over here. HDMI is my source. I'm just going to change it to 3840 by 2160. Apply that. I'm going to do the same thing to the backup. Now I don't have to worry too much about this EDID because my source is coming out of a EDID manager, so that it's going to send the 3840 by 2160 signal no matter what I do. So I have an external DA with EDID management going to both of the controllers, both of the senders from a laptop. And screen is 3840 by 2160. HDMI 2.0 is my input. And close that. And save. Now I know that only took 20 minutes, but that's one of the things I like about using Smart for planning shows in multiple screens. It's very, very easy to build your entire show offline and then just connect up to the correct senders. The trick is just make sure that if you want to have redundancy or you want to have multiple senders, you have to add them all as a group. You can't just drop them in singly and make them communicate to each other. So, are there any other things that people want to see in Smart as far as multiple sender applications? Can you please explain the redundance part on Smart? Yes. What are some of the pros and cons of configuring redundancy the way you did versus separate senders for primary and reverse backup apps? So, okay. And can I load the Smart file to the controller and then import it into LCT? Once you load it into the controller, you can then open LCT. It's stored in the sender. So yes, it will show up in LCT the same way with the same information. There are a couple of caveats. Smart allows you to do single screens that exceed the capacity of a single sender. LCT does not. So if I built a screen that was bigger than one sender in Smart, if you try and open that in LCT, it gets confused. In LCT, you have multi-screen management for that. Smart actually allows you to build screens bigger than one sender all in one lump. Let me start with the pros and cons of configuring redundancy versus using separate sender. Yes, there are a lot of pros. This way works. You don't have to use the reverse path. That really isn't the correct way. If you wanted to do non-cascaded senders, so that's two senders that aren't talking to each other, you would load the same screen configuration in both of them, not a reverse configuration, and then you would tell sender, the primary sender, hey, you're the primary, and the backup sender, you're the backup. With this system, I can assign redundancy to any port from any other port. And they actually communicate back and forth. The two senders know what each other are doing. So it's a smart system versus a non-smart system. Low latency, what things should you consider? Let me go into that. So, and I have to move my little zoom box out of the way. So low latency. Over here in Smart, you get the sender low latency mode. So if I turn that on and do apply to all, it has now enabled low latency in both my main and backup. In order to enable sender low latency, your pixel space has to be 512 pixels per port or smaller horizontally. So that's why when I wired this, these cabinets are 480 pixels wide. So I wired them vertically. So that port is 480 pixels wide. If I did two of them, they'd be 960 pixels wide, and I could not turn on sender low latency. So that's sender low latency. In order to turn on receiver low latency, I'd have to have an A8 or an A10S receiver card. And this is just a generic file, so it doesn't actually have a receiver card associated with it. So I can't turn on receiver low latency. Redundancy part on Smart. Sure. So redundancy in Smart, hot backup. Now, the nice thing, if you're running Smart for the first time, there's actually an animation that steps through all the different redundancy options that Smart offers. So I'm just going to make this window a little bit bigger. So right now, this is my main sender and this is my backup sender. I can get rid of that by just clicking that. Now there are just two senders. There is no backup. There is no main. There are multiple ways that you can set up redundancy. So redundancy could be ports within a given controller. So I could take one of these ports and make it redundant to a port in the same controller. I can drag a port from one controller to the other, and that's how redundancy is set up. Or I can take the entire controller. Let me delete those. That one on, drag that one on, to set up the redundancy of port to port. So all 16 of these ports are backed up by all 16 of these. I just drag it on top, and I'm done. That's in LCT, you would have to write primary sender number 1, primary port number 1, backup sender number 2, backup port number 1, and then duplicate that 16 times. But in Smart, you can just drag and drop, and they're all set up. So this says there's two-way communication between these. Only works with cascaded devices. So you have to have them interconnected either via UART, which would be your 600 and your 660, or via USB, which is your 660 Pro or your MCTRL 4K or your R5s. Any specific issues with using multiple senders on one screen for more ports? No, it's just how it's approached. So multiple senders in LCT, you have to use multi-screen management. You cannot make a screen in LCT that's bigger than one sender. In Smart, you can make, let me close this. So to make a second screen in Smart, you just click the little plus icon and you get screen number 2. And over here, I can change. So if I make this one WED 4K, and if I wanted to make another screen here and call this WED HD, and I was just going to do, let's just do a tiny 3x3 here. So I made a little tiny 3x3 screen. That's now a separate screen. And because I'm in online mode, I can save this, and I'll save the second screen, but I'm not, I don't have any connections to it because I've used all the data ports. Advantage of low latency. The advantage of low latency is if you have the example I gave during the NCE presentations, you have a presenter on stage who is moving and the movement lags behind on the LED display. I had a client who was trying to get a clock, literally like a countdown clock, that was both in the foreground of the shot and was on the LED display relatively close to in sync with each other. And the way to do that was to enable low latency. I use both Smart and LCT depending. The monitoring functionality in LCT exists. So during a live event, I will have the monitoring page in LCT up and open, especially the new monitoring system, so that we can see when there's cabinet issues or communication issues. And there is no monitoring system really in Smart currently. Drag and drop does work for backup. I just did it. Have I used low latency mode? Yes, it solved a broadcast client's issue just by changing how the cabinets were wired. The big thing is Lowering the latency on the sender side is dependent on the cabinet wiring. Lowering the latency on the receiver side is dependent on what receiver card. So if you have an A8 or an A10S receiver and you have either a 660 Pro or an MCTRL 4K, you can, the latency on the sender side gets to be sub 1 line, and the latency on the receiver card side depends on the driver chip, but it can be down to as little as 1 frame. Yes, there actually is a whole series of YouTube videos I did on Smart and how to use it. I stepped through the entire Smart process from beginning to end. It's like 9 videos. It's about 12 hours. Is there any plan to upgrade the software to have video overlay and drag window type scaling? So if you're talking about a scaler, so like a UHD Junior, VX6S, VX4S, that's more, that's what V-Can does. So V-Can is the scaling control software. And if you have a UHD Junior, there is a really nice, in the latest firmware update, there's a really nice web interface that handles the scalar engine via a web browser. So that's on the UHD Junior and the latest firmware update. Yeah, the trick on the drag and drop, it's getting it to be on the same port. So that's why I did the erase and add them together. If you add 2 singles, they on Smart, the senders are on different ports, and then you can't do the drag and drop. I probably spent better part of 2 days chasing my tail trying to figure that part out. That's why I wanted to show how to do it here. And we also have Gilbert is here. So if there are any other NovaStar questions, Gilbert is eminently capable of diving into things that I don't know about. So let's see if I got everything. Mm-hmm.
Hello, is anybody still have a question? Feel free to ask George. Don't miss this chance. Okay, if you don't have any question more, so today's training is finished. In future, if you still have any query about anything related to NovaStar, feel free to reach us. We can also help you to get your answer. Okay, thanks, George. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for
Thank you.
inviting me.
Okay. Have a good day.